Welcome to the Homes with a Heart 21st Century Caregiving Day 4 training. I'm Joanne Mars, a clinician with Kids and Families Together. In this training, we will be discussing the importance of attachment and cultural identity to children's healthy development. As you go through today's training, keep in mind the important things that you've been learning about trauma, how it impacts children's development and behavior. Be thinking about these things we've already learned in class. How can you incorporate what you're learning as you move into attachment and its connections to relationship-based healing?
Hello and welcome back to Day 4 with Joanne and I. We're super excited to have you with us. We have a lot to talk about today, so at any time if you need to press pause and take a break, we definitely recommend it because we are going to cover a lot of material. Okay, so what are some of our objectives today? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about attachment. Previous to these days, we talked more about trauma and what to expect from behaviors of kids who experience trauma. And today we're going to talk about, well, how are attachments formed in a healthy situation? And then what does that look like in a neglectful situation? We'll define what's your role as a family mentor and how can we help you identify some strategies for nurturing and promoting family connections and attachment. But more importantly, what does this look like from a co-parenting standpoint? Right. So can a child be attached to more than one adult figure? And moreover, an adult figure that's not in their home, because you would be that person, right? So how do we get healthy attachment with you and that child? And how do we transition that child back to healthy attachment with their parents? Sometimes people ask, well, if we're working on this in the home and you're expecting us to co-parent, well, what are the biological parents doing to also help them with this co-parenting piece? Well, there's going to be plenty of opportunity for that co-parenting piece where you could start sharing your experiences with the child, where you could start sharing how you're exhibiting healthy attachment. And then the family's also getting help as well. So just like you're going through these classes, just like you may be integrated into some therapy sessions or psychoeducation, the parents are as well. So we talked about that case plan in the first day. So Joanne and I want you to keep that in mind, that the hard work you're putting in and to help with this family mentoring and this the connections and this healthy attachment, the parents are doing that work too. Then we're going to transition to defining cultural humility and articulate its importance in reaching positive outcomes for children and families. And we're going to define racial disproportionality and explain the role of you, the resource family, and how you can help address racial bias and also be an advocate, not just for the children in your home, but for the community around you. Identify strategies in working towards cultural humility, and then explain what's your role in helping this youth develop their racial and ethnic identity. And when we're talking about that, you're going to see that theme pop up again about co-parenting. And how can we utilize the parents here? How can we utilize the family to really find out even more important things about this child, about their culture and what's important, and how can that also help with attachment, right? So really everything here is a theme that's put together on purpose to show you really how all this is going to help with the overall wellness and well-being of this child.
All right, so starting with looking at how attachments are formed. So defining attachment. It describes the human infant's tendency to seek comfort, support, nurturance, and protection from a small number of caregivers. Based on interactions with adult caregivers, infants gradually learn to seek comfort and protection, not from just anyone, but selectively from caregivers upon whom they have learned that they can rely. So you notice in that definition, they're not talking about that this is just a bond of love. Love is a part of it, but that's not a key element to attachment. What we're really looking for is security and safety. It's about infants seeking that comfort, nurture, protection from a caregiver. Do you feel seen? Do your needs matter? Are the caregivers in your life reliable and trustworthy? These are some really key elements. And it's how we define what a child's attachment looks like. So a child who has a healthy attachment has a secure attachment because they feel safe with that caregiver. Kids who have not had nurturing caregivers have an insecure attachment. So when they're with that caregiver, they may love them very much, but does that person make them feel safe and seen? Reliable caregivers are attuned and attentive to the needs of the child and to the child themselves. Your actions are predictable. It doesn't mean that you never make a mistake or that you're never going to have a time where you can't follow through on something, but that you're generally reliable. If the child cries, you come, you feed them, you change them. When they're tired, you help them go to sleep. When they need comfort, you rock them. When kids are crying and we hold them, they're looking at us, we're looking in their eyes. When they're lonely and bored, we're playing with them, we're making funny faces. These are all the things that build this attachment between the child and us. So the propensity for human infants to form attachments is believed to be so strong that only in highly unusual and maladaptive caregiving environments do attachments fail to develop. So this is what happens when kids don't have reliable caregivers. They're wired to connect. They're wired to cry when they have needs. But if they don't have somebody responding and building those connections, then they may fail to develop attachment. Children are helpless and not able to survive without us. And so recognizing these pieces that attachment ties in with the child's true need for us. In the past, there's been this belief that kids need to cry it out or learn to be independent, that they can self-soothe. And babies really are not born with the ability to self-soothe. They need us. They need adults to regulate them, regulate their bodies. All these things where we're meeting their needs, we're doing that. And so recognizing that attention and comfort is one of those needs for children. It's a true need. It builds their bodies, their brains. It builds their mental health. It builds their ability to have healthy, strong relationships in the future. And so we've talked about neglect in this class and recognizing that attachment is all about building these strong, healthy, safe, secure bonds that actually allow a child to be more independent, more exploration, that because they know they have a safe base to come back to, they can go out in the world and explore things. And they have an adult they trust who's going to let them know, hey, that's not a safe thing to do. Come back. You're going to guide them and help them with those things.
So I'm going to go ahead and read this for you, that attachment is considered a vital component of social and emotional development in the early years. And individual differences in the quality of relationships, of attachment relationships, are believed to be early indicators of mental health. So I want to go back real quick to what Joanne said, and she provided such a great example of, as adults, you provide this home safe place, right? So they're always looking back to you, right? Did I do something right? Am I okay? Is really what we're talking about in attachment. When they fall, they look to you and they're like, am I hurt? Even though they physically can't really feel yet if they are or not. They look at you first. And so kind of a light example I like to provide is a lot of my friends have kids. And when we're playing and the kid falls, it's always in the parent's reaction if we know. So I have a few friends that are like, oh, they're fine. And guess what? That kid most of the time just continues with their day, continues with playing. But it's the parents that kind of like react like, oh my God, are you okay? And then they make it in their facial expression as if they're not okay, even though in reality they are. The child is responding based off the parent's reaction. We're talking about young children here. Children at this point with attachment, they want trust and they rely on you. Are you trustworthy? Don't think about just young kids. Think about kids who are in their 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 and all the way to teenagers. How do you display trust? How are you consistent in your parenting? How are you consistent in your structure that you're providing for them? The other important thing with attachment is children having a voice. As adults, we like having a voice, and kind of sometimes think back to when your childhood, and Joanne and I don't know your experiences, but was there a time where you wanted a voice in something in your life? And you could use a very lighthearted example or something a little more intense, but was there a time where you wanted to have a voice? Do these children get to have a voice? What does that translate to? Well, it translates to that they matter, that you care about their opinion, that we want them to feel worthy and support it. So those are just a few things to think about when we're talking about attachment. And then the last big piece with attachment, as we transition into probably more quotes in the presentation, is the emotional regulation. So Joanne and I discussed this a little bit in day 2. Remember the stop, drop, and roll, and really having a child go from 0 to 10, and then learning in their safe corner, learning in their calming corner to come down. Attachment also teaches that. So the example I always use is the whole idea of sleep training. And I know my parents' generation, they were huge on this idea of sleep training, but no one would ever talk about what sleep training was or what attachment is, and how do they coexist? Well, when my mom would talk about it, or my aunts and uncles, they would talk about leaving the baby in there to cry it out. right? And sometimes as early as a month. And then I remember being in class the first time I learned about child development. I was like, oh, that's not good. Like, we shouldn't have done that. But the point is, there's a difference when you're sleep training a child. It's because you've already taught the child that you're going to respond. You've already taught the child that you are a safe caregiver. And so when the sleep training, and some of you might be shaking your head and you can relate to this, it's because you're trying to have the child self-soothe, because now you're at a point where this relationship is connected, is attached securely, and then the child might actually fuss less. The child's going to be able to self-soothe quicker. The child's going to be able to emotionally regulate sooner. And why? Because they know that you're going to show up, right? That right now they have the ability to self-soothe. Where before, some people would look at a crying baby and think, oh no, they have to cry it out, they'll be fine, right? But we want to make sure, and there's nothing wrong with that once you have that secure attachment, right? The child needs to have that relationship established with you. They need to know that they have the ability to self-soothe and that you're going to show up, which Joanne referenced in the last slide. Okay, so we're going to walk you through what does this look like? What does this look like when we're talking about when a baby cries? What happens with the adult caregiver? What's happening in our brain when a child cries? What's happening in a child's brain when they cry? And then what do we do? What does a healthy attachment look like? And on the flip side, we're going to end the example with what does it look like when it's not healthy? So what happens when we're weaving through that web of attachment?
So we're going to start. I am going to be the baby in our activity, and Rebecca's going to be my caregiver. And so I'm going to express a need as the baby, and she's going to try and meet that need. All right, so the baby is fussing.
Does the baby need a diaper?
Nope.
Does the baby need a bottle?
Yes. The baby was hungry. So then thinking about what happens when a baby's hungry and you feed it, how does the baby respond? They stop fussing, relax. Is that a nice experience as the caregiver to be successful?
Yes.
All right, so then you get the yarn back because it feels good as the caregiver to have a successful interaction. So if I fall asleep, as you said, then what would you do next?
I would take a nap too.
So maybe you put me in my crib and you take a nap.
Right.
Okay, go ahead and throw the yarn back to me, because at some point that baby's going to wake up. And that baby's going to have needs again. Baby wakes up, and so you hear crying.
The baby needs to be picked up.
All right, it's a good start. It's not all the baby needs. Baby's still crying.
The baby needs to be burped.
Yes. All right, so then how do you think the baby responds to that? Or just describe your experience as a caregiver when you burp a baby, and what it's like for you.
The baby is calm, makes eye contact, smiles.
So the baby's happy, and again, like we said before, probably makes you happy.
Right.
Okay, so now the baby's going to need something else. So you've been holding the baby, you burp the baby, but now the baby starts to kind of fuss a little bit and make a face.
The baby needs a diaper change.
Yes, I was going to demonstrate the face, but I decided not to. But you can imagine the face. Yes, happy baby, diaper change. So what do you do with the baby after the diaper change?
I put it down.
Okay. So now the baby, let's see, had all the good stuff happen already. The baby just kind of moving around, kind of babbling, fussing a little bit.
I babble back.
Baby likes that. Lots of good attention. All right, so you can see we're getting lots of good connections here. So this is that idea, that web of attachment, that every time we have a successful interaction, we're connected more and more. And then even when Rebecca didn't get it right one time, she tried again, we still got that connection. So now the caregiver is going to be a little busier. So you can kind of decide for yourself what is interfering with you coming to the baby. But I'll describe what the baby's doing, and You can either catch the yarn or not catch the yarn. Tell me what's happening. So the baby starts fussing again.
I'm in the bathroom.
Oh, man. Baby starts crying louder.
Taking a walk from the bathroom to the kitchen.
Baby's crying a little bit louder. Still trying. I'm hungry here. Oops, I gave it away. That's okay.
The baby's hungry.
You were going to the kitchen anyway. You knew what we were doing. All right, so I'm assuming you come and feed the baby then.
Right.
So have you ever had an experience with the baby where by the time you're able to get to them, they're so upset they can't eat?
Yes.
So even though you brought the bottle, baby's still crying. Just all worked up, can't quite calm down. So what do you do then?
Pick up the baby, rock the baby, bounce the baby.
Try and soothe the baby
soothe
until...
the baby,
Okay, now I'll eat.
feed the baby.
Alright. I think the baby's happy with all that, but doesn't seem sleepy. So baby's eaten, content, but not sleepy. So what would you do next?
Get out the baby toys.
Alright, baby likes that. So one of the other scenarios that I want to think about too is, so we had some conflicts or some things where caregiver wasn't readily available. But what if you bring a baby or a child into your home who hasn't had this? So we've been talking about attachment in today's class, and this is to illustrate if you've got that safe, reliable caregiver who keeps trying to meet the baby's needs, you keep building these connections. But what if a child doesn't have this experience? What if they come to you and they don't have all these connections? And so I'm going to give it to you. We'll still hold on to these, but go ahead and let this hand fall a little bit, just so they're not quite so visible for the moment. So the baby's just laying quietly in the crib. So as the caregiver, as time passes, if the baby's just kind of laying there, what would you...
Let the baby lay there.
Okay.
Oh.
Come back to you. Baby's just laying there.
Caregiver turns on the TV.
Baby doesn't really care about that TV. So think about it. This is a baby who hasn't had those good connections, either doesn't respond as well to caregivers or maybe doesn't ask for help.
Check on the baby.
Baby's okay with it, still just kind of there.
Pick up the baby.
Okay. A little bit of holding's good. Now as time passes, eventually the baby's going to need food or a diaper or something, right?
Right.
So how would you figure that out if you've got a baby that just kind of lays there and waits for you to show up?
I try to feed it a bottle.
Yeah, you just keep kind of coming, and you're already describing like you come and check on the baby, try and feed the baby. So again, so it's trying to illustrate the idea of a baby that may not ask for help, and that you may have to be checking in and kind of offering that. So even like with an older child, then you might have a toddler that just tries to go feed themselves the best they can. But again, just holding up this visual of having all these webs of connection. And you could have other people in there if you've got multiple caregivers, if you've got a daycare provider, maybe in the situations we're looking at, you've got a child, you've got biological parents, you've got resource family parents. And so this web of connection can include a lot of people. And recognizing that, so I'm the baby, but this isn't a one-way connection. It's not just about me as the baby connecting to Rebecca. She's also getting connected to me and to other people that are important to that baby. That you become this bigger web. But also that if you had, I don't know if you ever had the experience of a colicky baby or a baby who really didn't respond, but what do you imagine would happen if you're trying to meet the needs of a baby and it just doesn't work over and over and over again? What happens to you as the caregiver? What does it feel like?
Feels frustrating.
So you might get more tense.
Mm-hmm.
That tension the baby's going to feel, that might affect how the baby responds. You might need a break. But it's, I remember experience once helping somebody with a baby. That baby was crying for an hour and we couldn't figure out what was going on. And so, like me and this mom started taking breaks. I'd give her a break and I'd sit with the baby. She'd give me a break. So recognizing there's those times where you're really trying to connect with somebody and they're just not responding, it's stressful for you too. It's harder for the adult to connect with the child if the child's like, I'm not interested or I'm not reaching out. So also imagine like if you had a teenager in your house who's had a long history of adults not being there and they don't have all these connections. They may have, one or two to a bio parent, and you keep reaching out and tossing that yarn, and they're just kind of like, yeah, no, not interested, I don't need this connection. That's going to affect the adults as well, and that the adult may really struggle to connect with the child. So that key element that we've been talking about with attachment, reliable caregiving, which means repetition. You're not going to get it right every time, and that's totally okay. Really attuned, attentive caregivers get it right about 50% of the time, which means the other half of the time, it's do-overs, it's trying again. It's making repairs if you got it wrong. You thought the baby was hungry, but really their diaper was dirty. You thought their diaper was dirty, but really they wanted to play. So that coming back and trying again is just as important as whether or not you get it right the first time. And then every time that she met my needs, I described the baby as calming down, being happy. You're changing their emotional state. You're helping them regulate their emotions. So they're learning to trust the adult that's well connected, learning to expect that my needs are going to be met, learning to relax and feel safe, and you just keep, and again, that both parties are connecting to each other.
Okay, so as we transition off of weaving through the web, we're hopeful that you were able to see how quickly connections happen and occur on a daily basis between adult caregiver and child. And that's just one activity. So really multiply that by every day and throughout a child's lifetime. Now we're going to transition to one of our favorite exercises, all the instructors, I should say, at Kids and Families Together, our favorite exercise of all 5 classes. And it's called the 5 connections. So at this point in the presentation, again, I know we're virtual and that Joanne and I are not there with you, but if you can look around your house and go get one piece of paper that you're going to split into 5 pieces and a pen or a pencil. And go ahead and pause. I'll be here waiting for you when you come back. Okay, so I do want to show you because I know in class sometimes people ask. So hopefully you could see that I just have a small piece of paper. It does not have to be perfect. And you're just going to rip them like this. So you have 5 of these. Okay. We're just writing. We're not writing a story. We're just going to have one word on each of these. So at the end of you cutting these or if you like perfection, yes, you're going to get your scissors. I have people in class all the time. They're like, I can't do this. I need scissors. But if not, just freely cut this or rip it with your hands. And then you have your pen or pencil. And I would like to ask you to not write anything down until I'm done finishing the instruction. So as you're sitting there, I really want you to connect with me. I really want you to listen to me and really look at me right now and what I'm about to tell you, because this exercise is incredibly important. And again, it's all about self-reflection here. So I want you to think about your life right now, and I want you to think about who and what or where is important to you. What makes you get up in the morning? What motivates you? Who or what is part of your identity? What's important to you? Who did you call today? Who do you call every day? Right? Think about maybe someone that's passed and you still talk to them, either out loud. Maybe if you pray, you talk to them through prayer. Maybe you go visit them at their gravesite, right? Everyone has a different connection. Maybe there's a pet. Maybe there's a pet you've had for 5 years. Maybe there's a pet you've had for 10 years. Maybe there's a pet that you've had that's come into your life at a very crucial time that you needed coping with. And then maybe there's an activity. Maybe you like to go self-reflect at the beach. Maybe you do yoga. Maybe you like to exercise or read. There's all kind of things we can list, right, that make us who we are or that bring joy to our life. But I also want you to think about, who do you call when you're having a bad day? Who do you call when you're having a good day? So really just start to sit with those thoughts, sit with the questions I just gave to you, and then think about, okay, out of all those things, people, places, things, spirituality, how would you narrow that down to five connections, right? So just sit with that. I want to slow down because I know I get excited. So I want you to sit with those thoughts, sit with those questions, get your 5 connections. And then in the way I do it, and one of the rules I want you to know is, let's say you have 5 children. I'm going to ask you to write 5 closest connections, but you cannot write children on your sheet. Okay. You would have to write 1 child per slip. I'm not going to tell your children how you rank them, but if your children were your 5 closest connections, then you would have to right now start to think, who's the 5th connection? Who's my 4th? Who's my 3rd? Who's my 2? And who's my 1? If you have pets, you have to choose 1 pet. You can't choose both, your cat and your dog. If there's someone that you like to talk to, or if there's a place that you go for self-reflection, you can only pick 1. Okay. So I'm going to give you a moment. Think about those 5 connections. It could be a mix of things, of people. It does not have to be all people. It does not have to be all places. Anything that makes you a part of who you are. And to give you an example, I have had people that put their spirituality. I have people that put music. I have people that put going to the beach. Maybe their partner, right? So there's nothing you could put on here that's wrong. So take a moment, pause me again. Pause me when my face is doing something pleasant. And then go ahead and write your 5 connections. And then we're going to come back together and kind of walk you through how we're going to work with our 5 connections. Okay. So now that we're back, you guys have your 5 connections. You've written them down. Some of you might have ranked them, right? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in your head. It's okay if you didn't. You could just choose. But for the purpose of learning virtually, I do need you to really know who's your 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, I want you to think about this 5th connection that you have. So who's number 5 here? I want you to sit and I want you to pick them up and I want you to look at it. Okay. And if it's a person, I want you to think about the last time you talked to them. I want you to think about the last conversation you had with them. I want you to think about, what did you talk about? Was it something happy? Was it something sad? Did you laugh? Did you cry? So really think about that. And I want you to literally hold them up. Okay. I should have put something on here. I did not, but I want you to hold up that person up. And I want you to do this. I want you to rip it. Okay. Now at this point, you might have liked Joanne and I, but I think on this next step, you might not stop liking me, but I want you to literally rip them. And then I want you to drop them on the ground. And I know some of you are not dropping them, and I want you to drop them. So physically drop them on the ground right now. And so that piece of paper is no longer in your hands. I'm going to give you a second to do that. Please drop them. If you're there with your partner or a family member right now, encourage the person next to you to drop them. Awesome. So now I want you to sit with that you just lost that connection. So when we get off today, you would no longer be able to talk to this person, go visit this place. Really, that connection's gone. You have lost it. So I want you to sit with that and what that would mean to you. When I told you to drop them and that you no longer have a connection with them, what's that feel like for you? What does that look like for you? Are you angry at me for taking them away? Do you feel some sort of emotional response right now? And I want you to really think about what your life would be like without them right now, or without this place, or this activity, or this hobby, or this pet. What does it look like? What does it feel like? Now, at this point, we would be able to have a little bit of conversation about that. Unfortunately, we can't have that dialogue right now. And honestly, I think in the first drop, it's better because I want you to sit with it. I want you to sit with the heaviness on your heart. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm trying to be real about what our kids in foster care experience. And this is just one connection that you've lost. Okay. So I want you to think about, okay, I have 4 remaining. Jen can't take them all. I have 4 remaining. So 1 I could deal with, right? I'm older now. I've only really have these 5 closest things because I'm older now. So I don't need that many connections. So you have 4 remaining. So I want you to think about that 4th person. And I'm going to give you a second to reorganize them if you want. Because now that you kind of see what I'm doing, do you want to move someone around? Is there someone that you're like is 2 and no, now 4 is 2 and I want 2 to be 4. I want to give you that opportunity to do that while still knowing 5 can't come back. So at this point, I want you to look at number 4. If you have it, I'll give you a second. I don't want to rush you. Awesome. So I want you to look at 4 and same thing. Is this a person, place, pet, anything? When's the last time you talked to this person? When's the last time you visited this place? What did number 4, why is number 4 where they are? Why did you rank 4 where this person is or place or thing? What has it done for you? What has it done for your life? If it's a person, where do they live? How often do you talk to them? How often do you visit them? If this is someone that lives far away from you, were you planning on going to see them? Do you wish you would have planned to go see them earlier? Because if you were hanging on to that, oh, we should go do this. We should go visit this person. We should go do this. Well, I'm going to take this 4th person away and you can no longer go see them. That opportunity just got ripped out from under you. So same thing we did last time. I want you to take that piece of paper and I want you to rip it and I want you to throw it on the ground. I'll give you a moment because I know sometimes it's hard to say goodbye. So I'm going to give you a moment, but I really want you to rip it. And I'm not going for theatrical effects here, but I want you to really feel that you're the one that is taking this person and you're putting them on the ground. So go ahead and do that. Throw them on the ground. You could place them nicely, but put them on the ground. And now you no longer have this 4th person. So now in a course of, I don't know, 6 or 7 minutes, you have lost 2 people, 2 connections. I'm going to keep saying people, but it's connections. So I apologize for that. So whoever or whatever your 4th was is no longer there. So now I really do want you to self-reflect and think about what your life would be like without that 4th person and that 5th connection. So 4th and 5th connection. What does that look like? What are you feeling right now? How are you starting to put yourself in these kids' shoes that are in your home, right? What have they lost? But as we move into the 3rd connection, I want you to think about this. What is it right now that you've done on the past 2 moves that these kids don't have a choice in? I just gave the answer away. The word choice. You've had a choice. I've given you a choice to have a decision on who you want to drop. So you chose who to drop for number 5. You also had time to review it. You had time to write it. You had time to think about it. And more importantly, you had time to choose who to drop. And maybe you did switch them around and I'll never know. And that's okay. That's okay if you did switch them around. But these kids don't have a choice. These kids don't have a choice when they leave their home. They don't have a choice that their parents have done something that put them in this position. They don't have a choice sometimes that they have to move schools. They don't have a choice sometimes that they lose their friends, that they've lost their family, that they've lost their routine. They don't have a choice. And now they're coming into your home. They don't have that choice, right? So what does that look like? When you start to think about the behaviors, can you start to see, wow, this makes sense. I would do the same thing. So although I'm not with you, and this is why I had you label them, you don't have a choice in who you lose next. You don't. So you should have your number 3, your number 2, and your number 1 person left or connection. So I'm going to choose someone for you. But I need you to be honest. I need you to keep your 3 where they are. So I'll give you a second if you want to rearrange them. Your 3, 2, and 1 connection. It is really tempting for me right now to take number 1. But I'm in a good mood, so I'm not going to. So I want you to think of 3, 2, and 1. And I'm going to take your number 2. So whoever you have labeled as number 2, I want you to look at them. And I really want you to think about this connection. Why did you put them as number 2? When you were having your deciding moments of who's 2 and 1, you probably were really deciding between these 2 of who was going to be 2 and who was going to be 1. There might be just a gap of difference of why that person's number 2, a small gap. So I'm choosing because our kids, they don't get to choose. So I'm choosing for you and I'm taking your connection away. So I want you to look at 2, whomever or whatever it is. Same thing, get your hands, rip it, and put them on the ground. You've lost them. You cannot talk to them. You cannot be with them. You cannot have that connection anymore. What would your life look like? In my class, by 2 and 1, we have a lot of family connection. We have a lot of spiritual connections, right? So maybe you chose God. Let's talk about that. If a child did believe in a higher being or spirituality, do you think they might be challenging that a little bit right now in your home? What would that look like for you? How would you navigate that? Right? And if you did choose God, he forgives me for this exercise, or she forgives me for this exercise. But now you have 2 remaining, right? So you should have your number 3 and you should have your number 1. Okay. So I'm going to do it again, and I am going to take someone from you. Okay. But before I do that, I want you to think about how you chose these 5. And now that we know the exercise, has there been anyone else or any place else or anything coming in that you're like, this also makes me who I am, or this also is part of my life, or this helps me get going in the morning, right? So I want you to think about that. Maybe you have more than 5, right? But these are our 5 closest. So I'm going to take your number 3, and I want you to, same thing, think about this person, think about this place, and now think about the children and the kids in your home. Is this person, place, or thing that you have written down for your number 3, is this something that the kids might have too, right? And then is this something that if you were 4 would be overwhelming to lose? This, if you were 6 and you lost your number 3, you're 18, 16, doesn't matter the age. What if you're a newborn and you've lost this? You've lost 5, 4, 2, actually 5, 4, 3, 2. You've lost them all. What does that look like for you? And I want you to sit with that. How does that look like for this child? How would you wake up tomorrow if you lost all these connections? How would you feel? And obviously, we might not know 100% how we feel until we navigate that. We might not know how we would react, but I guarantee you it would be sad, right? So in my class, sometimes I will take away number 1. Most of the time I don't. It depends on my class and how things are going. But for this, because I don't see you and you're already throwing stuff at the screen at me, I am going to let you keep number 1. But I want you to think, and this is why I do it, I want you to think about what your relationship with number 1 would be, knowing that you lost all 4 of the other ones before. So what would your relationship with this person look like? And would it be the same? We talk about trauma. Day 2, we talked about trauma. We talked about different types of trauma. Do you think you just experienced some trauma losing those 4? Do you think that you might be behaving differently? That your attachment to this number 1 person or thing might look differently? Yes. So there's a chance that by you holding on to number 1, that you might also emotionally lose them, because you're not going to be the same. You're not going to be the same for the rest of your life because you just lost 4 important connections to your life. So I'm going to allow you to keep number 1. but I want you to truly think about how you would navigate this newness. So look at them, but think about the 4 that are on the ground. I'll let you sit with that for a second. And then we're going to come back together. And I want to debrief with you that this is just an exercise, right? But us as instructors, we want you to feel it. And I know me and I know Joanne, we feel it when we do it, right? I'm passionate about it because this is one way I verbally can try. I could try to have you just feel a little bit, a percent of what these kids are feeling. Their loss of connection, their loss of attachment. And what's your role in this? What's your role with the kids? So it's an exercise. And I need you to hear that this is an exercise for you. It's not an exercise for the kids. It's life. This will always be with them. Even with reunification and it's healthy and everything's okay, guess what? The trauma will always be there. The idea that they lost these connections at one point will always be there. So that's where attachment comes in. And when we're talking about resiliency, this is the part of the training where you start to put everything together. This exercise right here. Again, take a deep breath. Sorry if that's loud. I have a microphone. But you're okay. You're okay. I would clean up the mess you just made on the floor, pick them all back up. You get to keep them. And hopefully you could just walk a little bit more in these kids' shoes from this exercise. Okay, as you saw in the 5 connections, you got to kind of sit with your own experience, right? And what that would be like for you. And now you're starting to put this towards the child's experience. Maybe you have 1 child in your home, maybe you have 2 children in your home. And you're starting to be like, okay, this is how I would be. This is how I would react. I'm starting to understand this child. I'm starting to look at their behavior as a root of their trauma. And that's the ultimate goal in these 5 classes, is that trauma sensitive care. How are you going to meet the needs of the child? And so keep that exercise in mind. Keep the 5 connections with you. I encourage you to go talk about it with other people, right? And think about it when the child's in your care. But to kind of put more things in perspective, we are going to open up another case here. We're going to talk about a teenager, which is really important. All of us that teach kids and families, we're all advocates of the teenagers, right? And opening your mind to taking in a teenager. What does that look like? Maybe in day 1, you're like, not sure I could do it. That's okay. But maybe by day 5, and maybe by the time you kind of navigate your own journey, you'll start to realize, you know what? I can work with a teenager, and they have their own special uniqueness that other kids don't, teenagers. So let's meet Birdie. Again, her story is true. Her name is not, and her picture that you're seeing is not. So I want you to be mindful of that. But as Joanne and I are reading the story, I want you to really listen to the words coming out of our mouth and listen to the descriptions that we give you. And if you do have your guide in front of you, you could follow along with us. It's the same. So it is going to be a few minutes. I'm going to start off, and then Joanne's going to come in. All right, so let's meet Birdie. Birdie is her nickname because there was a time when she thought she could fly away and she jumped off the roof, breaking her arm. Or her wing, as they joked. It was no joke. Birdie's life has been difficult ever since her mom died, dead in the street after she shot up some bad heroin when Birdie was 5. Her dad said he would keep her, but his addiction made it tough. He carted that little girl all over town while he scrounged for change and tried to get drugs. Sometimes he would get clean for a while and stay with his parents, who doted on the little girl, but then he would blow it up and get kicked out. They'd surf couches while he moved from neighborhood to neighborhood downtown. She wasn't a crier then, and she isn't a crier now. Finally, someone noticed that her dad was not right, and he had an 8-year-old with him, and protective services was waiting for them at the place they were crashing at. That was when they hoped to get some cops to help to let her go. He kept trying to get into rehab, and that's all he had to do. But he couldn't get past the first week without sneaking off or signing himself out. By Birdie's count, she has been in 7 foster homes, 5 shelters, including twice in the Joshua House, and has run away and lived on the street off and on. Last year, she found her dad and they made an agreement. He would go to rehab and get clean, and she would go back to stay in a home so the judge would let them live together.
Now, think a minute of, what kind of reactions do you have so far to Birdie's story? So what does it kind of bring up for you? Anything you particularly noticed? Especially, I always like to focus on that last couple of sentences and think about who does it sound like kind of initiated this plan, this agreement? And the way it's worded, it kind of seems like Birdie went in search of her dad. And so that can just reflect a little bit of what's her role in this family, that in some ways she's the adult. All right, continuing. So Birdie has begun to settle into living in your home. Although she has clearly been uncomfortable in the transition, Birdie stays in her room most of the time, but will join your family when required. For example, she'll join you for meals or activities that you tell her the whole family is doing. School has been especially difficult. Because of her running away in multiple placements, Birdie has been placed in 6th grade and is on the older side of the class ages, which she finds embarrassing. She needs to have tutoring and extra help for almost every class, and the school has warned that she may not be able to be promoted to 7th grade next year. During class, teachers report that Birdie seems inattentive and bored. She often asks to leave the class to go to the bathroom and then takes a long time to return. Birdie's English teacher believes that it's possible she never really learned to read fluently and has called for a series of tests. You've noticed that Birdie always wears long-sleeve shirts, and you understand from the social worker that in the past, Birdie used to inflict injuries on her own arms and legs. Because of her history of self-injury, the social worker has asked that you keep note of any signs of blood, unusual scratches or marks, or anything that may indicate that this behavior has started again. So far, her skin is scarred but clear, and there has not been a sign of reoccurrence. Socially, Birdie has not made any friends, although she is kind and patient with the younger child in your home. The school and your other child in middle school, so this other child apparently goes to the same school as Birdie, report that Birdie sits alone at lunch and that she does not speak to any other students. In class, when called upon, she sometimes answers and at other times simply shrugs or says that she does not know the answer to the question. Her isolation has caused worry for the family, and Birdie makes it clear that she is only staying in one place because she has made a deal with her father that she would. So first I want to kind of think about what are we seeing in terms of signs of attachment. You're probably also noticing, things related to trauma. And you may be thinking back to, in previous case studies, we identified different types of trauma. So we can see there's neglect. There's also potential that this child may have experienced a lot of things we don't know about because of she and her dad couch surfing, and that while he's using drugs, he would not have been able to properly supervise her. She's also run away and been on the streets by herself. So there may be a lot of things that have happened to her that she has not admitted to anybody or shared with anybody yet. So there may be quite a bit of trauma we're not aware of. But we can kind of look at who's important to her, what are her connections, and what are signs of how secure do you think her attachment is? How safe do you think she feels with dad? How much trust do you think she has in adults in general? And I'm curious, Jen, for you, like what kind of things does it bring up for you, or what kind of responses do you get in class when you talk about this case study?
Yeah, it's a great question. The initial reaction that I always get is that folks are angry at the dad, right? They're angry at the father. People bring up questions like, how can he do that? But what I like to, I hear them and I validate that, but I also want to bring up that there's a part in the story, there's 2 parts that sometimes people skip over. One, how Birdie got her nickname. Sometimes people miss that it's leading to that it was attempted suicide. And so think about that. The story can be, we don't know for sure, but we kind of bring that up in class. Could that be? So think about that. And then the second thing is, there's a part in the story where they say that they had to get the cops to remove them from each other, right? Because they didn't want to be separated. So I want you guys to think about that too. With the attachment, with the struggle of the father. But I know people are angry and they want to save Birdie. I get that a lot. I get people say, I want to bring her in. I want to save her, right? Using that word. So those are the kind of the main themes I should say I get in my class, but we also want you to think, Joanne and I want you to think about how would you work with Birdie and how would you work with the father? Because we are trying to keep tying that co-parenting piece. I'm not going to give you the answers right now because we are going to kind of present a little bit more here in a second, but keep Birdie in mind. Keep Miguel and Marisol in mind from day 2 as we start to talk a little more in detail about this co-parenting piece. So Joanne and I are going to do another dialogue, and this time we're going to kind of provide you examples of what the biological parent might be experiencing and then what the resource family might be experiencing. Again, keep it in mind, Birdie's story and the other children from the other day. But we really want you to think of these situations and then how would you react in them, right? What does co-parenting look like to you? How it could be so successful for reunification. And that's why co-parenting is so important, because recent research has showed that it is crucial to have this really a team behind the family, right? And you're part of the team. We talked about that a little bit in day 1, but you're part of the team to help this family get back together. I also want to bring up that Joanne and I don't know your family. I don't know your experiences, especially if you are working with your family relatives. I don't know your history. I understand that there may have been some struggles. I understand even with your own son or daughter or whomever that is, or niece, nephew, whomever, that there's history. So Joanne and I are not suggesting that you go and become best friends right away and that we have to erase that history, the struggles, the challenges. I'm not suggesting that. And I want you to hear that. But I also want you to know this is an open case. So the state of California and Ventura County is telling us, look, this is what's best for reunification. So we need to kind of be partners in that. And there's 2 different things here. You don't have to be best friends with this person if they are your family, and there are things that you can't forgive right now. That's okay. But is there a way that you can navigate this to be there for the child and to be there for healthy reunification? So just kind of keep wrestling with that a little bit as Joanne and I continue to work with you. So we are going to read a script, and I'm going to be the part of the resource family of you. So we're friends now. And then Joanne is going to be the birth parent. And so again, I'm the resource family and Joanne is the birth parent. I also want to note that they're like kind of separate stanzas after a while. So it's not a continuous story. So they'll kind of be separate examples. And I am going to play the resource family and Joanne is going to play the biological parent. So I'll remind you again, we both will, just so you can visualize what we're saying and who we're playing. Okay, resource family. I cannot understand how you could hurt or neglect this child. Now that I have come to love this child, your actions make me sad, angry, and afraid of what lies ahead of her.
Biological parent. I know you can't understand my past actions, and to tell you the truth, sometimes I can't understand it either. It's hard to work all this out and follow this case plan, owning up to what I did and how it hurt my child. And then I have to face you knowing that you're doing the things I'm supposed to do.
If I was in your shoes, I would have stopped using drugs and alcohol and sought help to be able to parent my child. Everyone knows how drugs and alcohol can ruin lives. I try to understand, but then I see the impact on this child I love, and I become emotional about it again.
I wish I had been more able to stop using, but when a person's addicted, it's like a disease. In fact, sometimes when I did get sober, my shame about my past actions made me go back to using. I guess I was still in denial and I was afraid that I couldn't change.
I try so hard not to judge you, but I just can't understand why you cannot leave your partner when you saw the fear in your child's eyes. I still see that fear when there's a loud noise or when someone is angry. Why couldn't you just leave?
I know you think of only the bad times when our family was violent and when things were really bad. You have to believe me that there was also some great times and times when things were going well. I loved my child and I tried my best to keep him safe, but sometimes I couldn't even keep myself safe.
When your mental illness is under control, you have so many strengths to care for your child, and our partnership goes so well. But then it's like a roller coaster. Things fall apart for you, and I'm left comforting a child who had his hopes up again. I just don't know how often I can go through this.
I wish there was a way to find treatment that works and stick with it, but I can't seem to stay stable long enough to get through the case plan without incident. I just don't understand it myself. How can I help my child understand what we've been living with?
No matter how I love this child and care for her, she always wants to go home to you. I feel like I may never really get to take care of her. When we get close, she feels disloyal and she does something to back off from me and our family.
No matter how I love this child and I care for her, I'm walking a hard road to recovery, change, and forgiveness. I want her to be happy, but sometimes I don't really want her to be happy with you. I want to be sure I'm her real parent.
I'm not trying to steal your child, but I am committed to providing a home and family for him for as long as he needs it. Sometimes it feels like he's torn, but he doesn't really need to be. There's always a place for him with us, whether he lives safely here with us or returns safely to you.
I can't turn my back on my child. Even if I never get her back, I know she will keep looking for me, and I have to find a way to be there and to let her be happy and at peace.
Don't make promises you can't keep, like promising the children they will be home by their birthday.
Whenever I see you, all I can think of is how my kids were removed and that they were given to you. This is traumatizing, and I'm so afraid my kids won't love me anymore.
I know we are partners, but there are times when I'm torn between meeting your needs for scheduling and visits and my family's needs for routine and stability. Can we work together to find a solution halfway?
Every day that I miss with my child is another day I can never get back. When I have a chance to visit and be a part of his life, it helps us all.
I really appreciate how you talk with me before you make plans with your son. That way we can show him the adults are working together.
I wish you had called me or talked with me before making big decisions about my child. I would like to be part of the decision making for him, even when he isn't in my care.
It would really help me if you didn't bring soda to the visits we have. I noticed that after he drinks caffeine, he has trouble settling down for the nighttime routine.
Can you sit down with me and talk about any drama that goes on among the kids in your house? When I hear it secondhand through my daughter, I feel really torn, but I try to remember that I'm only hearing her side of the story. I need to know you are taking care of it when she feels left out.
Would you be willing to do some homework as well during your visits with him? He seems to have too much homework to get it all done at school. And after visits, I think it would really help him and you to do it with you. I could take the subjects you don't want to.
Can you let me answer some of the questions at the doctor's office? I know she's in your home now, but some of the questions are things that I know, and it helps me feel less awkward in those appointments if I can add something.
Thank you for supporting our family and our rules when you visit with your child. It really helps me support you and share our partnership.
Thank you for taking good care of my child. I know she's in good hands while I try to work things out.
Very cool. All right. So I know, Joanne, for me in class, um, that people are very surprised about how it can start intense, right? It can start with some, I don't want to say hostility, but just tension. But that they notice the trend and the theme that you can work towards working together. Anything that from your class that you feel that people really get out of it besides trying, right? Communicating.
It's kind of a mix of it. You touched on it a little bit of, recognizing for relatives that it's a different kind of challenge, that sometimes there is so much history, but that it's just still so crucial to find a way to work together. And, it's something in different parts of the class we talk about it. Like you said, it's not about being best friends, but can you find ways to safely co-parent and connect? Because it really is. It's for the kids. It's all about what's going to work for them, and it makes such a difference for them. So when we want you to have empathy for biological parents, it's not the same as sympathy, and it doesn't mean loosening up your boundaries. It just means, there's less judgment, and you can speak about them more positively, and you can relate to that. The child feels such a strong connection. And it just, again, acknowledging that for relatives, it can be really hard to overcome their own personal feelings towards this family member.
Yeah, awesome. And also just to, again, if you're not doing this yet, right? Because maybe you don't have placement yet. Visualize yourself in in Joanne and I's position, the resource family and the biological family, and think about that first call, right? I'm gonna show you. That's gonna bring us to our next topic here. How do we do that? How do we support this co-caregiving, this co-partnership? So the county is really going to help you with the establishing first contact. now I'm talking to you in a sense that you don't know this person, right? Maybe it's someone you know. You don't have to worry about this because you might already had that first contact. But the county is going to help you with what's called a comfort call. Ideally, we would like this to happen within the first day or two of this comfort call between you and the biological parent. So think about this. I want you to think about, what do you want to ask? It's going to depend on the age of the child, probably, right? It's going to depend if they're school age. It's going to depend on how many children you have. Maybe you have a sibling set. It's going to depend on what your life is looking like right now. What's your routine? Where are you? How many kids do you have in your house? But what kind of questions do you want to ask the biological parent? But I also want you to think about, what do you think they're going to ask you? Because you have to be prepared to answer questions too, right? What would you want to know if your child was in someone else's care? And just put yourself in this biological parent's shoes. What do you think they want to know? If you do have other children in the home, they might want to know that. And what kind of kids are they? What's their personalities? What do they like to do? I think that's a fair question. They might ask what school district you're in. They might ask if you have any pets. But what do you want to know? Knowing that we might not know everything about the child upon placement. The social worker might not either, especially if this is a first-time placement. We might not know what kind of allergies the kid has. Maybe there's a peanut allergy. We might not know that. So maybe those are some things to ask. But some other big questions we get in my class and that we'd like to talk about is, ask about the child. What do they like to do? What do they like to do for fun? What's their favorite color? What name do they like to go by? That's huge. It has to do with identity, right? What do they like to eat? That's my favorite. How can we relate with food, right? In a little bit, we're going to talk about culture, and I'm going to bring that back. Then we want to move down here and go to maintain contact. What does that look like? You have a cell phone. I mean, there's so many ways to stay connected. This does get brought up in class, so I do want to put it out there. A lot of families use Google, a Google phone number, right? You could use your own cell phone and you set up a Google phone number through that. You could do that if you just want that communication to go through that number and not your own. That's okay. But maintain contact. Be encouraging. That kind of the ones on the left, maintain, encourage, and ask questions, is kind of go together here, because by maintaining contact, you're encouraged to continue to ask questions. And I want to just say that you're also encouraged to provide encouragement, right? I had to do it, Joanne. I had to. Be positive. Ask questions about the next medical appointment. Ask questions if they can in the case plan. If they want to go, can they go? Be creative with your visitations. People always think about just a boring government building. That's the only place you have to have visitations. That's not true. Once things get going and you're building this rapport, go to the park, go on a hike, be non-traditional, maybe do a puzzle together, do some homework together. That's a great bonding experience. Maybe scrapbook together, play sports, go on a walk. It does not have to be what you think stereotypically of sitting down and just like awkwardly staring at each other. Be creative. The better these visitations are, swinging it back to that attachment, right? The more we could build trust in those environments. Go ahead, Joanne.
I just wanted to point out that, well, two things, more than just one thing. There's tips for visitation. There's elements of family visits. They're all in the guide, so there's more information there. But I wanted also to add in, there's an idea I really like that some people have done of keeping, it can be very brief, but kind of a daily log or journal of things that are happening in the child's life. And so even if you struggle with direct communication, even if this parent doesn't necessarily maybe respond a whole lot to you texting or calling, that you could still use something like a journal, both for communication and to really help the child in the visit. Because we all know kids that, okay, this is 1 hour a week. And what's that parent going to do? What are you doing? Was it good? How's this? How's that? It's just a barrage of questions. And kids' response is quite often, I don't know. It was good. It was good. Everything's fine. Kids don't know what to say. So if you keep a log of some things that are happening, we went to a birthday party, or they got an A on their spelling test, then it gives the parent this sense that, okay, you're supporting me, you've given me information, and I have something to talk to my child about. When I say, what'd you do? And they say, I don't know. Well, hey, it looks like you got an A on your spelling test. Tell me a little bit about that. It can really help them have a better conversation with their child. And so really think about those things that you can do for those visits.
Over here on the right, we have expecting some resistance. And this could be for family or non-relatives. At first, when we talked about it, we talked about that resistance at first, actually, that tension. That was a better word than tension that I used, is this resistance. You have my child. Think about in your head right now, what might some of these biological parents think? And I could tell you in my class, sometimes people say, oh, this person's stealing my child. And that's not true, but it's okay that they think that at first. They're scared. They just lost their connection. They just lost their child. So continue to be positive. Again, I'm mindful that some of you have family dynamics that we won't ever know, right? So I'm mindful of that. I'm aware of that. Build upon the strengths. When parents are doing something really well, tell them about it. Using reflective listening. I think everyone in society could do this, right? But we listen to one another. We listen without judgment. We listen with intention. You're going to navigate all of this case by case, person by person. You're going to establish rapport differently with each parent, depending on where they are. Where are they in their journey to healing? Where are they really just in life right now and with their rehabilitation? Establishing contact, building upon everyone's strengths, being open, being honest, being calm. You're really going to set this up for success for co-parenting. So with this quote, I think it's powerful, and we're back on quotes, just so we all know. There's a couple more coming up. But that culture is to humans as water is to fish. So what does that do for you? What does this quote mean to you? Right? Is culture important in the way you were raised? Does it play a part of your identity? I'll show you here in a few minutes the statistics in Ventura County and what that looks like for us and our kids in our care. But what does it look like? What does it mean? And to all of us, culture can mean something different. So I want to be mindful of that. I also want to be mindful that there's culture within culture. Okay, so I'm not assuming anything about any culture, just as Joanne wouldn't, right? And as caregivers, we want to be mindful of that as well. And so Joanne and I will kind of show you what the research suggests and shows and how to learn more about different cultures. Go ahead, Joanne.
Just wanted to share, I found a joke that goes really well with this quote.
Okay.
It's two fish swimming around, and one fish says to the other fish, so what do you think about all this water? And the other fish says, what water? So that piece of, we don't always recognize the culture surrounding us, but just like fish and water, it's everywhere all the time. You're in it all the time. You may not realize how much it affects you, and it's necessary to life. That culture is just a huge piece of all this.
Right. I like that. As we move through this is an important part to the county because we do have children who statistically stay in the system longer than other children. And so what I want you to think about right now, can you take in a child that doesn't look like you? Can you take in a child who is raised differently than you, in a different ethnicity than you? And even in relative placements, we have mixed race families. We have blended families, right? We have biracial families. So being mindful of that just because they're family doesn't mean that you know everything about their ethnicity. So I'm going to read this because this is important. I know you could read, but I think it's important that Joanne and I also read these slides. When culture is ignored, families are at risk of not getting the support they need, or worse yet, receiving help that is more harmful than helpful. Culture influences how and from whom we seek support. Think about that sentence for a second. Who do you seek support from when you're going through something in life? Is it someone that looks like you? Is it a mentor? Does that person look like you? Culture informs our understanding of when support is needed. I'm not sure how to navigate this. I need some help here, right? I like to use myself as an example. If I bring in a child as a resource family of anyone else other than white, and even if they are white, but we're going to go with someone else that's not Caucasian, I need to go get education. I need to be humbled and knowing that I have to go get education to serve this child better, to get resources, to connect with their community. I don't know everything to how to support this child. And I know in my classes, Joanne, I tell people it's okay if you don't know, right? Sometimes we get defensive. Oh, no, I could do it. No, it's okay, right? If you've never taken care of a Black person's hair or skin, then you need to go get help with that. You need to seek out resources for that. And that's okay to admit that, right? Because we want to do more good for the child than harm. And sometimes it's like, if you have that initial reaction of, no, I can do it. I can do it myself. It's okay that you need help. It's okay. I'm telling you right now, it's okay. Right? It's better to admit them. And then culture influences how we attempt to provide support.
I wanted to throw a piece in that ties into, you talked about culture within culture. And, we tend, because I use the same example in class all the time of thinking about, what, and Jen and I share a similar background. I'm also a white lady doing this class. And so being very aware of that. So we tend to think of it on those broader terms that, if it's I'm white and I'm bringing in a black child, then I have to consider those things, and we do. Those are important. But again, culture within culture, every family culture is different. And so I had somebody share a story once that both the biological family and the resource family, who were not related to each other, they were all African American. And so these kids went into a family home that matched their racial background, but the families had different approaches to hair. Their biological parent was growing their hair out naturally and doing all the things to make sure that the kids had really healthy hair and that it was natural hair. She wasn't doing any perming or any of those kind of things. But the family that the kids went to, they all regularly straightened their hair. And so they did a permanent that straightened the children's hair. So even if you have that cultural match, you still really have to explore the culture of this other family, that just because we look similar doesn't mean that I do the same thing, do things the same way your family does.
So we're going to transition here, and I'm going to show you a video here.
Hey, line up! Line up! Everybody line up! We're about to race! Everybody line up! Shoulder to shoulder, take off your backpacks. Basketball, line up, we're about to race. Hey, we are racing for a $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this, a $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm going to make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability, you don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I have said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story.
So thinking about that video we just saw with the privilege walk, and what did you notice in there? Kind of what are your thoughts on that? And this is going to help us transition into thinking about cultural humility. And I think in the video, he made a point of kind of highlighting that these kids getting to take a step forward and then turn around and look back. That, when you're at the head of the race, you may not be thinking that much about the people around you. You're just kind of aware of where you are, and to turn around and realize that what's going on for me may not be going on for everybody else. The folks who are in the back tend to be pretty aware of what's happening in front of them because it's right there in front of them. But the folks in the lead may just not be thinking what's happening behind them. And so to take that moment, look back, and recognize that we don't all get the same things in life. And his other key piece of all the questions he asked had nothing to do with personal choice. That the folks who got to take a step forward, it had nothing to do with, something they chose to do. And I think you can find examples of videos like this where they go into more and more questions. And I've done something like this, back in the past, where you also think about, gender, that you can take a step forward if you've never been discriminated against based on your gender or based on your religion and based on whether or not you're able-bodied, and to just keep thinking about these things and how they impact us. So one of the areas, children who get to live a life without abuse, to live with their biological parents, that is also a privilege. It's not the child's choice. It's not something that they're making happen. But kids who are in foster care may be a little farther back in the race because of foster care, because of their life experiences and how people respond to them. So really to be thinking about that, and I think it ties in nicely with the idea of I can treasure or feel proud of my cultural background. I can really be happy with the values that I've kind of decided work for me as an adult, but I can still be humble about how I look at what do other people value, what did they grow up with, what were their advantages or disadvantages, what happened for them. So we're going to go into a definition here that talks about what cultural humility is. So this is from the Child Welfare League of America. Cultural humility is the ability of individuals and systems to respond respectfully and effectively to people of all cultures, classes, races, ethnic backgrounds, sexual orientations, and faiths or religions in a manner that recognizes, affirms, and values the worth of individuals, families, tribes, and communities, and protects and preserves the dignity of each. So then this additional piece that we need to think about that's on the next slide here is when we're working with kids and with families that are in public child welfare. So age, is an additional consideration that we've got youth transitioning out of the child welfare system. And so what do these kids need? And then also socioeconomic status, class, and economics, and the impact that has. And with that one, I think, Jen was talking about like buses and public transportation and being aware of the struggles somebody may have. If somebody is in a job where they're going to lose their job if they leave work an hour early to go see their child, if they don't have a car and they have to take public transportation, how many hours early would they have to leave their job to get to a visit? If their job doesn't have health care, there can be all these things that are tied into somebody's class or economics that can impact their ability to show up for their child, even if they have the motivation, even if they're still willing to run that race. They might be looking at a bunch of people ahead of them. They might be looking at hurdles ahead of them. So they might still have the motivation, even in spite of that. Because, going back to the video and thinking about those people in the back, if at times they didn't feel like running that race, I think that would be pretty understandable. But it is still worth it to run the race. But they might need more support, more encouragement to keep running that race. So really trying to think about that piece, that if somebody's not showing up, is it because there's more hurdles in their way? Is it because they're overwhelmed? What can you do to reach out a hand and really see if you can kind of pull them along with you in that race?
So what is this culture of humility? Well, first, I know you're probably sick of me saying the word self-reflection, but you really have to have self-awareness of our own cultural lens. How do we see the world? Through culture too, right? Not just necessarily how we see the world in our experiences, but how does our culture play a piece in that? It is the piece. It is the lens. It's really not two things. How did we develop certain biases, our style preferences? I personally can disclose about my upbringing. I grew up in a very small town in Ohio, And I would say probably 98% predominantly white. My parents, I was very lucky. They grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood in a different town, right? So I was very lucky to have parents who taught me things that I necessarily didn't get exposed to based off the school I went to. And then I've traveled all over, lived again on East Coast and West Coast. So I've had experiences with different cultures. And I tell you that because does not mean that I know everything about every culture. I don't. I'm always learning, right? Sometimes I have to check myself when I think something, right? When I have that initial reaction. Nope. Check yourself, go learn about that, right? So continuously to be self-aware, continuously to look at through our own culture lens and our biases and our style preferences. How does this relate to the foster care system? Because we have children in the system who do not look like you, and in Ventura County. And Ventura County is taking this seriously. We want you to be able to take in kids that don't look like you. So also to have cultural humility, you must recognize the impact that our own cultural lens has on our role, our communication style, and perceptions. Communication style is huge here. Each culture communicates differently. Some cultures are very stern when they speak. And to someone else, it might seem like anger. It's not anger. That's just how they communicate. So voice tone plays a lot in culture. Someone looking you in the eyes or maybe away from you, that plays a part in culture. That's not a sign of disrespect. We need to commit to learning more about the culture of interest and respect families as the primary source for defining needs and priorities. And Joanne touched on that. Culture within culture. You need to go ask the questions. Develop skills in cross-cultural communication and increase your sensitivity to alienating behaviors, and be prepared to work with children and families in a culturally diverse and at times incompetent world. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about racial disproportionality and how this affects the Black community. In a slide, I'm going to show you the statistics, the bigger picture of the statistics in Ventura County, but it's important to talk a little bit about racial disproportionality and what research says about it. It's also important as we move forward as a system of care. And how do we self-reflect as therapists? How do we reflect as organizations within the county and the foster care system alone? How do we move forward to make sure that we're not contributing to this racial disproportionality, right? So this is important to Ventura County. We have to look inward at our own systems, at our own processes to make sure that we're not contributing to this. So evidence shows that children of all races are equally as likely to suffer from abuse and neglect, but children of color, especially African American children, are more likely to enter and remain in foster care. So a higher rate of poverty and challenges in accessing support services could contribute and does contribute to this racial disproportionality, as well as racial bias or cultural misunderstandings, difficulties in finding appropriate permanent homes. Those were identified as the main factors that influence this racial disproportionality in African American children in care nationwide, right? So there we're talking a little bit more nationwide, not just Ventura County. Okay, so let's talk specifically about children in care by ethnicity. You could gather this information by just simply Googling Ventura County foster care statistics. So don't think you have to memorize this. But I do want to just take a moment for you to see who we are serving and how this fits into your cultural lens. Thinking about, can I take in a child who identifies as Latino or Latina? Can I take in a child who is Black? Can I take in a child who is Asian? And if you are not white, can you take in a child who is white? So look at this slide. Again, you could access this by Google at any time. And then I just want to hone in on more specifically our statistics in Ventura County from just showing you a difference of 2009 and 2016. This is going to feel and look a little more applicable when the census comes out from 2020. So we could see the population that we're serving versus the population of our county, right? And the demographics, I should say, of our county. And that's where research and data starts to bring out the disproportionality. So maybe there's not a lot of Black people that live in Ventura County, but those children, by what research says, is spending more time in foster care. And so that's racial disproportionality, that there are more Black folks compared to the population of the Hispanic community or the white community that are spending longer time in the system. And we need to get down to the root of that and change that, right? And part of that starts with us. Can we take in a child that doesn't look like us?
So leading into this slide, I want to kind of do a reminder with that definition that we had about racial disproportionality, because in class, generally, this is where I find people are a little bit confused. So the key piece to remember from that definition is when we're looking here at this contributing factors, these are not contributing factors for abuse. That is not what we're saying. The definition was children of all races are equally likely to suffer from abuse or neglect. So what we're seeing here is that these are contributing factors for why children of color are more likely to be in the system or stay in the system longer. It's not because of increased rates of abuse. So what we're seeing here is lack of affordable housing. So, being homeless, what kind of housing you live in, the resources around housing, what kind of neighborhoods can you buy a home in? These are things that can impact the chances of your child going into care or staying in care longer. If a biological parent can't find a home in order to reunify with their child's going to stay in care longer. Distrust of the child welfare system. So historically, there have been some things that have happened on a nationwide level where there was policies that allowed children to be deliberately removed from certain families, certain cultures. And so historically, people do have some reasons why they may distrust child welfare system. There's also the fact that currently, just if you talk to kids, you talk to families, unfortunately, there's a lot of negative stereotypes. So things that even when they're not true, there's just fear around what does it mean to be a foster child? What does it mean to go into the foster care system? So that distrust can impact somebody's ability to really partner with you, with other members of the system. If a parent doesn't trust the social worker, they're going to have a hard time partnering with them, and it's going to impact their ability to be successful on their case plan. And then looking at lack of substance abuse and mental health services. If I were somebody that my job has great health care and my job is very understanding. And so if I'm dealing with alcoholism, I can go take a 3-month leave of absence. Maybe I'm not getting paid, but my job will be there when I come back. And my health care is going to make sure that I can go into a rehabilitation program. And I've got, my parents live here and they're great grandparents and, they're going to take awesome care of my kids. So I can just voluntarily let my kids stay with my family and I can go take care of myself. But what if I don't have any of those resources? What if I don't have health insurance or it doesn't cover rehab? What if I lose my job if I try and go do this? What if there aren't mental health services in the area I live in order to even start that process of examining this? It's going to be much harder for me to recover, and again, much more difficult to get my kids back. So this all kind of ties into this lack of supports and other services in poor neighborhoods, that they're just generally we find that there's less support. So that makes it more difficult. One of the nice things that has changed in California is that we no longer completely rely on property taxes for school funding. And so that's an effort to balance out some of this racial disproportionality, is that if we can make the funding to schools go to the school based on the need of the children in the school rather than what town they live in, then kids' education is going to be much more fair and equal from neighborhood to neighborhood. And that's going to set kids up into a better position when they're looking at colleges. So it's something that us as individuals addressing this and then really putting that into the system to try and get our system to change and address these issues. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what can you do to kind of help racial disproportionality. So this is how to help. One of the big things, Jen mentioned it earlier, of really being an ally and an advocate. Can you partner with this parent? So you're supporting them and you're cheerleading them, but you're also paying attention. Are they having misunderstandings where they don't understand what's being asked of them? And maybe it's a cultural communication piece. Or are other people that have to work with them misunderstanding that biological parent's intention? So finding those ways that you can really be there as a partner with them. So co-caregiving and involving parents in decision-making helps address this disproportionality, supporting their efforts for reunification and permanency, advocating for the child and for the family, and mentoring the biological parents.
All right. So transracial resource families is the name that is given for families who consist of children of one race or culture being raised by parents of a different culture, race, or culture. So transracial families are considered families of color. So how can you help? So you have the responsibility to help their children define themselves as a member of their own genetic, racial, and cultural.
So think about these things, really think about it in your life. Some of these are things that you could, really try and, reach out and change immediately. Some are things that, would not be so easy to change in the moment, but you could think about in the future and future decisions. So how many friends do you have of another race or culture? And it's something where it doesn't have to be a negative that, it's not that you're a bad person because if all your friends look similar, but to recognize that it means, all right, so if all of my friends come from the same background as I do, I'm just not being exposed to other backgrounds. And so I might need to make that effort to go find out more about different kinds of folks and different cultural backgrounds. So it can just be that. It could also be maybe you do have the opportunity to make friends with people you hadn't really thought about making friends before because you just hadn't questioned this. What types of things do you seek to know about other cultures? Again, thinking about all the stuff that you consume through media, books you read, music you listen to, TV shows, movies, all of that stuff. That's all culture. It may not seem like, high culture. Maybe you think opera when we say culture, but everything we get through the media reflects mainstream US culture. So thinking about, do I just kind of follow what's really easily accessible? Am I really looking to find out information about other cultures? So what types of things do you want to know? Do you attend multicultural events and celebrations? So just again, looking at, do I have exposure to different faith traditions, different ways that other cultures may celebrate things? This one's that piece that Jen really talked about before of thinking about specialized skin and hair care for children of color. So that's just something that some of this is going to, depends on thinking about our county and what's available to you. That because we do have a smaller population of African Americans in our county, some of these might be harder resources to go find. But you might happen to be lucky enough to have a neighbor, and somebody close by. If you don't, go on YouTube and look up videos. There's lots of videos. I also recommend this for dads raising kids that, there are tons of videos of single dads doing their daughter's hair. And aside from the fact that it's just adorable to watch, if you're the dad, the men in your life, if you're paying attention to the girls, if you're brushing their hair, they're going to love that. I still remember the one time my stepdad did my hair and it was a little wonky, but it's a positive memory that he made that effort to do my hair. So be thinking about those kinds of things and where can you get these resources? Have you incorporated other races and cultures into your home life? It's very common that, okay, so I've got a child from a different background. I'm going to incorporate some information from their background, but try and think bigger than that. Really try and have a multicultural household as much as possible. If most of the time we're just kind of focused on culture that is my norm, I'm not really thinking about, I'm just kind of doing what I've always done. But every now and then I make a point to really highlight the child's culture. They might actually feel a little bit like this is too much focus on them in that moment. We want it to be a much more natural kind of thing that, hey, look, we're always exploring culture. We're going to put a little more focus on yours because it's important, because it's yours. But we're going to try and have it feel like this is just a kind of a natural incorporation into our family life, that we just celebrate a lot of things. And this is just something that this is awesome about you. Are the schools in your area diverse with children of many cultures? So this is something that, when you're looking at schools, you're really based on where you live. But in the future, if you're moving, you can be thinking about those kinds of things. How multicultural is the community that I'm moving to or living in? What cultures are represented in your church? And then think about, how does your extended family view people of different races? That you yourself may be feeling like, oh, I got this. I'm good. I'm already very multicultural. I've already really thought about my own cultural background. I got myself figured out. But when you go to a big family event, do you have that family member that's like, oh, what are they going to say? It might not be something outright that it's going to be really bad, but, are there layers to how maybe family members speak or treat people. And so being aware of those kinds of things. Sometimes it might just be kind of have a conversation with this family member and just kind of lead the way in terms of, this is a child I'm bringing into my home. And, I've noticed you make these comments from time to time. So I just kind of wanted to have a conversation. Let's talk about this. So you might be helping a family member become a little bit more aware of themselves and become a little bit more multicultural. Or you might discover that, all right, I'm going to just have to kind of help my child understand why this relative might have a more narrow view of things.
Very cool. So what are some tasks to become transracial parents, right? And this is a task list that you do not have to necessarily do everything. These are just suggestions, and we're continuing to self-reflect. I want you to continue to think about music, food, dress, language, traditions, and celebrations. That's what I want you to continue focusing on and going up and finding those things, right? Going out and finding those things. But just to point out one thing here is make your home a bicultural home because a child's living in there. Talk about race and culture often and stand up to racism and discrimination. And a lot of times that's within your family, like Joanne just said. I pull in a lot of examples from class where people have to have their most intense conversations with family, within their family. Celebrate this culture. Find out about it. And that brings me to the transracial parenting, answering the difficult questions. You will get these questions from strangers. You will get these questions from your family. For some reason, it tends to happen a lot in the grocery store or in public. I'm not sure why, but people are very rude and feel very brave in these situations. And I'm pulling in from 3 years of teaching these classes what people have told me in their experiences. So just start thinking about how you would answer difficult questions like, why would you raise a Black child? You're white. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Or if you bring in a Hispanic child, you don't know anything about the Hispanic culture. Why would you do that? Right? These are people asking you questions about why you chose to do this. So I want you to think about how you would answer those. But I also want you to know that there are situations where the child could be there with you, hearing this. How are you going to teach that child how to answer those? And I want you to answer the other ones on your own, but always know that children have the right to not answer or educate anyone, just like you do. But children are in a little more vulnerable position. They do not ever have to educate anyone. And I want to bring it back to Black children. And let's take, it's a 15-year-old or 16-year-old. Do you think that's the first time that they've heard those questions? Do you think that's the first time that they've been brought out something because of their skin color? No, it's more than we'll ever know, more than I'll ever be able to grasp. So do you think if they're being asked these questions in person with you there in a grocery store, what that might do to them? So it's getting help to help with these questions. It's getting help to how to respond to people. It's being humble, like Joanne said earlier, being humble and knowing that you might not know the answers, and that's okay. Right? But you might get questions of, oh, well, where's his or her real mom? Right? So just think about these difficult questions. People will ask them. Go ahead, Joanne. I know you had something.
I just kind of echoing the same thing, but the same kinds of questions. And, we talk about it under transracial parenting because that's where you're most likely to get them. Some of them are the difficult questions around race and culture where this may be your first time experiencing this kind of prejudice or discrimination because this child is now in your home. And so it may be a question you've never had to answer yourself because that wasn't your life experience. Some of this is just questions that people would ask anybody that they know is fostering or adopting, but they're more likely to ask you if you and the child don't look alike. So if you were a white family fostering or adopting a white child, the question of, is this child yours, is less likely to come up just because people don't see the difference as much. But you may still get some of these questions, even if you're a relative, even if the child looks similar to you, and to really have that conversation with kids about, this could be a friend asking you who knows that you're a foster child. How do you want to talk to them about it? And really helping that child figure out how do they want to respond. But if this is a stranger in the grocery store, like Jen said, that might be a whole different answer. If it's my friend and they're curious about me and they care about me, sure, maybe I'll talk about it. But, the nosy lady in the grocery store, I think one of the really common ones, if a child does resemble you, is, is this your real mom or where is your real mom? And lots of both foster and adopted parents will say, I am right here, standing right here.
Very cool. Yeah, that's awesome, Joanne. Thank you. So that does complete day 4. We covered a lot of material. Thank you for staying with us and for being on day 4 journey with us, because we really brought a roller coaster of emotions and content. So we want to thank you, and we look forward to day 5.